Ben Hodges is a retired United States Army officer who served as the commanding general at the United States Army in Europe. Ben Hodges, thank you so much for being back on DW.
Thank you very much for the privilege.
President Zelensky acknowledged for the first time that Ukrainian troops have been crossing the border into the Russian Kursk region. Is this in line with the agreements with the US and other countries that provided weapons to Ukraine?
Well, of course, in the public, we won't know exactly what has been agreed or whatever. I'm happy, at least, that the United States is not trying to put the brakes on what Ukraine is doing. I have not heard any public statements saying that Ukraine should not do this. Of course, Ukraine has the right to defend itself, which includes eliminating areas, sanctuary, from which Russia is attacking Ukrainian towns and villages and killing innocent Ukrainian citizens. So is this in line with Western policy? In the larger sense, yes, Ukraine is defending itself.
This sounds like one of the worst nightmares for the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, who said he never wants to see German tanks back on Russian soil.
I mean, I understand the point or the perceived dilemma, and this is the kind of thing that the Russians and the Kremlin firsters, this is what they will use. They will point to this. So this is the time for German government, for the Bundestag, to be calm and cool and recognize that this is Ukraine defending itself against Russia's attack, eliminating sanctuary from which a third of the Shahed drones, for example, had been launched against Ukrainian towns and cities, and putting pressure on Russia. I mean, this is classical military doctrine at work, trying to get the momentum, create dilemmas for the enemy, relieve pressure from other places. Ukraine has no interest in conquering Russian territory, but this will help force the Russians to recalculate what they're doing.
Volodymyr Zelensky obviously didn't talk to President Biden before they started this attack. This reminds me a little bit of Benjamin Netanyahu not talking to the White House before they assassinated the Hamas leader. Is this a new trend?
Of course, I don't know this, but I think the President Zelensky and the Ukrainian General Staff are smart to protect information. If we know about it, if people in Washington know about it, then for sure the Russians will eventually know about it, just because of leaks, not intentional perhaps, but nonetheless, information gets out. And on something like this, I think it was exactly the right thing to do to protect that information. Perhaps at some level there may have been some intelligence sharing, but it's good that all of us did not know about it.
So you don't see that as a sign that the White House, the Biden White House, is weaker?
This is such an important part of military operations, what we call OPSEC, operational security, not sharing information beyond who absolutely has to know. And, I think the Ukrainians need to have the freedom. My criticism of the Biden administration has been that we've had bad policies that hindered Ukraine's ability to defend itself. So I'm glad that there has been no message coming out saying, hey, be careful. And it also gives lie to this perception that somehow Putin will escalate, use nuclear weapons. The worst thing he's done so far is launch an attack at another Ukrainian supermarket. We have been deterring ourselves for too long.
So you would say there is no red line?
I certainly hope not.
So maybe, Ben, you know Ukraine so well, and also the military strategy of Volodymyr Zelensky. Why is he doing that now?
Of course, we don't know, and I'm not entitled to know. But as I do my own analysis, like everyone else, there are 3 or 4 things that I think they're trying to achieve. And of course, always in Ukraine, you have to keep in mind the weather. How much longer do they have before the weather turns really bad in the fall? So that perhaps is a consideration. But why now specifically? Of course, they have been suffering losses and very incremental, but nonetheless, losses in the eastern part with Russia being able to use their manpower at huge loss, but still making incremental gains. So I see this as a move by Ukraine to divert Russian resources, to cause the Russians to have to reposition forces to deal with this that would take pressure off of the other part where the Russians have been attacking. So diversion of resources, that's number one. Number two, there's a nuclear power plant in Kursk, which is not too far away. There's a huge gas hub that's in this area. So I think that one of the objectives is also about putting pressure on Russia's energy infrastructure to cause them to have to worry about that. Maybe even either destroying it or capturing it, and perhaps for a trade for Zaporizhia, for example. I don't know that, but I hear people speculating about that. Or maybe to redirect the energy from those places into Ukraine ahead of the winter. So there's a lot of different reasons at different levels of why they're doing what they're doing. We don't know, but it really it highlights the fallacy of thinking that now that there's drones, you can see everything and know everything. Obviously, that's not true. That Ukrainians are teaching us that the drones do not help you see through all of the fog of war. And there are reports that Gerasimov and the Russian general staff ignored intelligence indicators that Ukraine was about to attack. So there's still this human factor that's there as well.
Do you think it has also something to do that the Zelensky has troubles to recruit enough soldiers in Ukraine?
I don't know that there's a direct connection here, but clearly Ukraine still has the challenge to grow the army enough to have enough units to continue a long war. This is the job of the government to rebuild confidence in the population, for people to be confident that their son or daughter will not be sent into the fight until they're properly trained, properly equipped. So what we would call the institutional army for recruiting and training and equipping, that still is not adequate yet for what Ukraine needs. They're going to have to fix this for the long time. Even after the war, they're going to have to fix this part of Ukrainian armed forces. Certainly, if this changes morale, this change gives people more hope, that could have a positive influence. But I think they have to fix the system more than anything.
What has this to do with the elections here in the United States? Is there a pressure, is there time pressure that Zelensky might run out of time because he doesn't know who is in the White House next January?
I think you make a good point, as always, Ines, but for Zelensky, he has to, he's thinking about what's best for Ukraine. And just because in the case that Donald Trump is president, they're likely to receive, at least the perception is that they'll receive less support, although most of the Congress actually does support Ukraine. So it remains to be seen. I think President Zelensky's strategic thinking is driven more by how do you get Russians out of your country and less by who is the American president.
Would there be a change in policy if Kamala Harris would become the next president compared to Joe Biden?
We don't know. My guess is that they will continue at least what the Biden administration is doing. Probably a good chance that they'll be willing to do more. Her vice presidential pick, Governor Walz, is a Ukraine hawk. So my sense is that it will at least remain steady, if not get better. And of course, it'll always depends on the Congress, the makeup of the Congress as well.
Ben, there is huge concern that the outcome might be really very tight and that Trump and many of his MAGA supporters won't accept a loss. And this might be a time of chaos. How dangerous is this for the United States? You know, the time between November 5th, Election Day, and Inauguration Day in the midst of January. That's a long time.
Yeah, I imagine clearly the risk is there for the sort of chaos that you talk about. But I think that we as a population and the government are much better prepared and in the states for that possibility than we were 4 years ago. I think you're going to see responsible people on both sides are going to be calling for calm and to respect the outcome. I think that there's so much that's going to happen between now and November the 5th that is going to affect the actual election outcome. You know, as I watch the Trump campaign, the things that they do and say, you know, it's not a campaign that attracts more people. Whereas on the Harris campaign, the energy that I have observed in 4 different states now, it's incredible. I haven't seen anything like this in many, many years. And so I think that a lot's going to happen between now and then. The indiscipline of the Trump team, the things he says and does, the things that Mr. Vance, Senator Vance says and does, the risk of them making mistakes is huge, that I think will cause real problems for them. So, yeah, I think that's probably the best thing I could say is a lot is going to happen between now and November the 5th. And I always believe that positive leadership versus division ultimately always wins.
You just told me before we started taping that you are in Pennsylvania right now talking to MAGA people. Do you want to share a little bit what you tell them?
Well, I thought that it was important that now that I'm retired from the Army and can be more actively involved in political campaigns, that I help explain to veterans, for example, what's at stake. That the Plan 2025, for example, that is Trump is trying to distance himself from it, but these are all his people that wrote it, and it gives a clue into how they think about things. That they will make big cuts into pensions and other benefits for veterans. And Pennsylvania has tens of thousands of veterans. So people should be aware what this is about, and also what a threat he is to our Constitution. And of course, veterans took the oath to support and defend the Constitution. So I try to provide context there. And then I also want to remind Pennsylvanians, just as I did in Virginia, and we'll do next week in North Carolina, why American prosperity and security is tied directly to Europe's prosperity and security, and why it is in our interest in Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Virginia, South Carolina, it's in our interest that Ukraine defeats Russia, that this is not some far-off war or some charity. So that's been my approach. I'm not an expert on healthcare or other domestic issues, but I do try to help voters understand what is at stake between how the Trump campaign and MAGA candidates think about these things, which is a much more isolationist America First, which, by the way, contributed directly to our involvement in the Second World War. It was this isolationist America First approach that led to the Second World War, and we want to prevent that from happening again.
How do people react to you?
I would say that because I'm not an eloquent speaker or not a cheerleader, but I do try to speak very plainly, you can see that most people are like, well, that makes sense. Now, I have no illusions about what kind of impact I'm having. We'll see. But, you know, these races are so close. I mean, so close that just a handful of votes in each precinct could, in fact, make the difference. So that's what we're trying to do. Very, very grassroots level. And I have to say, it's been invigorating watching people, candidates, and people work very hard to reach their neighbors and people in their district to explain what's at stake and what we're trying to do. And so I feel like I'm doing my civic duty now.
Ben Hodges, always great talking to you. Thank you. I hope we can catch up a little closer to the election. That would be great.
I would be very happy to do that, Ines.
See you soon. Auf Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen. Tschüss.
Tschüss.